The nocturnal cadence of life at the funeral home had settled into an eerie routine for Rowan. The hidden act of secret sustenance from the newly arrived bodies had become a grueling reality she hadn't yet come to terms with. She would find herself in the night of her shift feeding on the corpses, draining every one of them in a manner that would be difficult for the funeral home to detect. She would drink from the opening in the neck of the corpses she would embalm. It was a grim necessity, a bridge between her old life and the shadowy realm she now found herself a part of. But then the number of corpses began to increase, each arriving in a more horrific state than the last. Blood-drained, lifeless husks that bore an unmistakable signature. Her immediate thoughts drifted to Loren, a sinking suspicion enveloping her. Finally, she could no longer ignore it. She had to confront him. So after her shift under the veiled cloak of night, she found herself driving to Loren's home, her emotions a cyclone of dread, anger, and something deeper. Still love, perhaps, but a love now marred by dark complexity. Upon arriving, the atmosphere of Loren's place was unsettlingly quiet. Hesitantly, she entered, using her newfound abilities to heighten her senses. What met her was a scene unlike anything she'd ever witnessed before. So Loren was there. But this was a version of him that she had never seen. Twisted, monstrous, almost unrecognizable to her. His face was contorted, eyes glowing an intense, demonic red. His teeth had elongated into fangs, now clearly visible even when his mouth was closed. It looked like he was in agony, his body almost convulsing as he fought against something internal. Rowan. His voice was a growl, the syllables barely coherent. "What are you doing here?" "I came to find out if you were the one responsible for the drained bodies at my funeral home," she replied, her voice tinged with both revulsion and concern. He laughed, a dark, bitter sound. "No, that wasn't me. I've been trying something, a way to regain my humanity. But it's not working. It's only making me lose myself more." The revelation hit her hard. Despite everything, Loren had been trying to escape this nightmare too. "You're starving yourself. Is this what happens when we don't feed?" Loren nodded, his head moving in slow, deliberate arcs. "Yes, and it's not just physical. It's mental too. The hunger, it's consuming me. I was hoping I could push through it, come out on the other side, but it seems there is no other side." Rowan took a shaky breath, the weight of their new reality sinking in. Could they ever find a semblance of normalcy, a moment of peace amidst the chaos? And who or what was responsible for the corpses now? If not Loren, then who else could it be? As these questions swirled through Rowan's mind, she knew that they were both at a precipice, staring into an abyss of existential quandaries and moral dilemmas. And though Loren stood before her as a monstrous iteration of the man she had loved, she also realized he was a mirror, reflecting the dark complexities and unspoken fears they both now harbored. Rowan spoke again, his voice less a growl now and more tinged with desperation. "If you're going to leave, if you're going to despise me, do it now. But if you stay, you should know there might be no turning back for either of us." In that charged moment filled with unspoken emotions and buried truths, she found herself standing at the threshold of a choice that could very well define the rest of her unnatural life. Rowan's gaze fixed on Loren's distorted visage, the hellish glow of his eyes mirroring the conflict within her. Time seemed to slow, each tick of the clock stretching out as she weighed her options. Despise him? How could she despise him when her own transformation into this shadowy existence was so fresh? "I'm not leaving, Loren," she finally said, her voice carrying a solemnity that echoed in the hushed room. "I came here to confront you, yes, but also to understand. Understand us, what we've become, what we're going to be." A shudder ran through Loren's frame at her words. For a moment, the demonic crimson of his eyes flickered, giving way to their original hue. A brief glimpse of the man trapped inside the monster. "Rowan," he whispered, "do you have any idea how complicated this is going to get? More complicated than secretly drinking the blood of the dead in a funeral home? Or more complicated than loving someone who's as much a monster as I am?" Rowan countered. "I'm ready for complicated, Loren." At her words, Loren seemed to find some semblance of control. His eyes closed, and when they reopened, they were a calmer shade of red. "I've missed you," he said, his voice breaking through the grim air like a ray of moonlight. "And if you're willing to stay, I promise we'll figure this out. Together. Starting with finding out who was behind the drained bodies, Rowan added, her eyes narrowing. If it's not you, then we've got another monster to deal with. Yes, Loren agreed. We've got a lot to face, Rowan. Our natures, our morality, the larger world of darkness we're now a part of, and of course whoever else is stalking the night. I don't know if we'll find answers or peace, but if we're going to try, I can't think of anyone else I'd want by my side. As Rowan stepped closer to Loren, his monstrous form seemed less terrifying and more a part of the complicated tapestry of their existence. She took his face in her hands, feeling the tension ebb from him at her touch. Then let's confront our demons, she said softly, both external and within. Loren leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a kiss filled with a passion that was new yet hauntingly familiar. In that moment, all their fears, challenges, and uncertainties seemed to melt away, leaving only the truth that they were irrevocably changed. They pulled away, locking eyes. A tacit understanding passed between them. Ahead lay a labyrinth of unknowns, moral ambiguities, and mortal dangers. But for now, in this still point of a turning world, they had each other. And so fortified by love yet burdened by their unspeakable realities, Rowan and Loren prepared to face the dark labyrinth of their existence, knowing that whatever awaited them, they would confront it together. Here in this silent sanctuary dimly lit by the soft glow of lingering twilight, they stood at the crossroads of their new life. A life of shadows fraught with peril, but perhaps, just perhaps, redeemable through love. With a newfound sense of purpose, Loren strode over to his freezer, opening it to reveal bags of stored blood. He fed voraciously, each gulp renewing his strength and diminishing the monstrous traits that had overtaken him. As the last drops nourished his undead physiology, he felt himself morphing back to his recognizable form. The change was almost immediate, his grotesque features smoothing out and the crimson in his eyes fading. Turning back to Rowan, he saw her watching him, a mixture of fascination and concern in her gaze. "You're back," she said softly, relief coloring her words. Physically, yes, he responded, taking a deep, unnecessary breath. But mentally, emotionally, those are battles still to be fought. Rowan nodded and then hesitated, as if debating whether to broach a sensitive topic. Finally, she spoke. "Loren, who is she? The one who did this to you, who initiated this chain of events. You must know something." Loren sighed. "I've encountered her just once since my transformation," he admitted. "It was at an abandoned mill, a run-down place where I just fed on a family. She appeared like a wraith, all but mocking my actions, my very existence. Then she was gone, just like that, a ghostly enigma." His words hung heavily in the air, adding yet another layer of complexity to their already convoluted lives. "I think it's time we revisited where all of this started for us," Loren said, more to himself than to Rowan. "Perhaps there are clues, something we missed that could help us draw her out." Grabbing their jackets, they found themselves driving back to the very scene where Loren had turned Rowan, where their new reality had violently taken root. The place was as hauntingly beautiful as ever, a stark contrast to the life-altering horrors it had witnessed. A thick fog seemed to shroud the area, as if nature itself was complicit in concealing their dark deeds. Stepping out of the car, they looked at each other, each aware of the gravity of what they were about to undertake. Loren's eyes met Rowan's, and he felt a shiver run down his spine, a mortal sensation that seemed alien now. "We're stepping into a minefield, Rowan," Rowan cautioned, "one that could have consequences we can't yet foresee. Are you ready for this?" Rowan looked at him, her eyes a reservoir of mixed emotions, fear, love, and a determination that took him aback. "As ready as I'll ever be." So Loren nodded, a sense of foreboding settling over him. They were about to rip open a Pandora's box of secrets and confrontations, and as they stood there side by side yet worlds apart, staring into the abyss of their uncertain future, Loren couldn't shake the unnerving feeling that the abyss was staring right back. The atmosphere thickened with tension as they moved closer to the spot where their lives had irrevocably diverged. It was a return to the scene of the crime, so to speak, but this time they were hunting for a different kind of truth. a truth that could either bind them closer or tear them apart forever. And in that pregnant pause, at that moment teetering on the edge of revelation and catastrophe, both felt the weight of the unknown bearing down upon them. What lay ahead was a foggy landscape of moral quandaries and deadly encounters, a journey into the heart of their own darkness. Loren glanced around, taking in the eerie scenery that stretched before them. He felt an unsettling sense of déjà vu, as if the place had been waiting for their return, a silent observer to their evolving narrative. Rowan sensed it too. They'd exchanged a look that said more than any words could, a fusion of understanding and trepidation. "Should we separate? Cover more ground?" Rowan suggested, eyeing the place cautiously. "No," Loren answered firmly, gripping her arm gently. "If she's here, or if there's something here to find, we'll find it together." They began walking, each step reverberating through the quiet like a heartbeat in a chest. Loren's heightened senses were on full alert. He could feel every change in the wind, hear the distant rustling of nocturnal creatures. They scanned the area, their eyes combing through every possible hiding spot, every dark corner that could serve as a lair for the elusive being who had ensnared them both in this life of eternal darkness. Rowan paused, her gaze fixed on something near a large oak tree. "Loren, look," she whispered, pointing. Propped against the trunk was a weathered wooden box that neither of them remembered seeing before. They approached cautiously. Loren bent down to examine it. The box looked ordinary, yet it radiated an air of mystique. With a nod from Rowan, he opened it. Found an assortment of items. Old photographs, a lock of hair, and most disturbingly, what appeared to be a vial of blood. Each item seemed to belong to a different era, a different story, and yet they were all connected by a common thread, a thread that Loren and Rowan were now a part of. "Is this a clue or a warning?" Rowan questioned, looking up at Loren with bewildered eyes. "I don't know," Loren admitted. "But it's clear that we're not the only ones who have been ensnared by this life, or by her. And whoever left this here knew we'd find it. We're being watched, Rowan, or guided perhaps to an end I can't yet fathom." The unsettling thought left a frigid atmosphere hanging between them, colder even than the autumn night that enveloped them. They closed the box, leaving it exactly as they had found it, a Pandora's box they weren't yet ready to fully open. Loren could feel Rowan's tension, a fear mixing with his own, blending into a potent cocktail of dread and anticipation. "Let's go back," Rowan finally spoke, her voice quivering slightly. "We're not going to solve this tonight, and each moment we linger could be inviting more trouble." Loren nodded, silently agreeing. They needed time to digest, to think, to plan their next move in a game where the rules were being written and rewritten in shadows. As they walked back to the car, Loren could feel it, eyes upon them, an energy hanging in the air, a reminder that their every move was under scrutiny. It seemed that as much as they sought answers, they themselves were also a part of someone else's question, a puzzle in a much larger scheme. "I have a feeling that things are about to escalate," Loren said softly, his words trailing off into the wind, carried away into the depths of the unknown. They climbed into the car, the engine purring to life, cutting through the heavy silence. But as they drove away, each was acutely aware that they were leaving a piece of themselves behind, a piece now entwined with the enigmatic forces that had pulled them into this abyss. And as they re-entered the world of the living, both knew that their lives would never be the same again. In that silent car ride, questions loomed larger than answers, the weight of their mutual dread and curiosity filling the space around them. And in that pause, both acknowledged, if only to themselves, that the point of no return had been crossed. As Loren drove them away from the haunting place that marked the beginning of their transformation, he could feel a tingle at the base of his skull, as if some kind of sixth sense was activating. It was different from his typical vampire heightened senses, like a raw, unfiltered version of them, scratching at the edges of his perception. Rowan must have felt it too, for her eyes met his with the same uneasy recognition. "Do you feel that?" she asked, her voice tinged with apprehension. "I do," he responded quietly. It's as if the very airs changed, gotten thicker. Just then, a swirl of dark mist seemed to gather and form in front of their car. Loren hit the brakes instinctively. The mist solidified for a split second into the vague shape of a woman, ethereal yet discernible, before scattering into 1,000 particles, disappearing as quickly as it had come. "What the hell was that?" Rowan exclaimed, gripping the dashboard. "Something beyond my understanding," Loren said, staring ahead into the void where the figure had stood. "Or perhaps the beginning of understanding." Loren pressed the gas pedal and they continued driving, but the atmosphere within the car had changed palpably. An aura of otherworldly attention seemed to be on them, an inscrutable gaze that transcended the mortal realm. As they reached Loren's home, Rowan hesitated at the doorway. "I think we're entangled in something far greater than us, something ancient, cosmic maybe." Loren looked at her, absorbing the weight of her words. "And the only way out is through," he added. "We're going to have to dig deeper, learn about these powers, these omens. We need to be prepared for whatever is coming." They entered the house, both acutely aware that they were crossing another, less visible threshold. This was no longer just about adapting to a life of nocturnal habits and sanguine appetites. This was about confronting an unfathomable enigma, one that sought them as much as they sought it. "I think we need to go back to that box," Rowan said, her voice a mixture of fear and determination. "I feel like it's a key, a guide maybe, to whatever puzzle we're part of." "Agreed," said Loren, "but not tonight. Let's give ourselves some time to absorb what's happening, to tap into these extra senses we're feeling. If we're to face this mystery, we should be as prepared as possible." He walked over to the shelf, reaching for an ancient-looking book. The tome felt different now, as if some force within it had activated in response to their recent experiences. "Let's start with this," he said, handing it over to Rowan. She took it from him, feeling an odd sensation pulse through her. "Feels like we're gathering tools for a battle we don't yet understand." "Precisely," Loren nodded. "And until we do understand, every moment is a pause filled with possibilities, each more unfathomable than the last." They sat down to read, but the questions they sought to answer had grown in scope and gravity, far transcending their personal struggles. What began as a quest for survival in a world turned upside down was evolving into a cosmic reckoning, a journey that promised to test not just their newfound powers, but the very essence of their being. The night outside deepened, but neither of them felt the urge to roam. They were both engrossed, each in their thoughts, and in the arcane words before them, aware that the next chapter of their unfolding story would demand more from them than they'd ever imagined. Rowan flipped through the pages of the ancient book Loren had handed her, her eyes scanning lines of cryptic texts and archaic symbols, yet her mind kept drifting back to the spectral figure they'd seen on the road. She suddenly remembered something Loren had said earlier, that they were entangled in something far greater than us. She felt an uneasy knot tighten in her stomach. She looked up to find Loren engrossed in a different text, meticulously sifting through handwritten notes and aged manuscripts. Both were deep in their respective literary rabbit holes when Rowan's gaze landed on a stack of newspapers sitting at the edge of Loren's desk. Curiosity piqued. She reached for them and began to skim through the headlines. Her eyes widened as she found a report on a series of mysterious attacks happening around town. But what caught her attention was not just the increasing frequency of the attacks, but the description of the assailant. A woman with dual-toned hair, blonde and black, said to lure her victims into dark, secluded areas. Saying a word, she handed the paper over to Loren. He read it carefully, his expression gradually morphing into one of stunned realization. "This matches," he said finally, looking up at her. "It matches the description of that shape we saw tonight, and it might match the woman who..." He paused, not finishing the sentence, but they both knew what he meant. Rowan's finger pointed to a sketch accompanying the article, a police rendering based on eyewitness accounts. Though crudely drawn, the face looked hauntingly familiar. "Do you think it's her? The one who did this to us?" Loren sighed, setting the paper down. "I don't know. But if it is, she's becoming brazen. Or maybe she's just getting started," Rowan suggested, a shiver running down her spine. She felt a wave of dread wash over her, but also an odd sense of purpose. This was a clue, perhaps the first real clue, to the puzzle they found themselves enmeshed in. Loren rose from his chair, pacing the room. "We should keep an eye on this, but not engage. Not yet. We still don't know the extent of what we're dealing with. Rowan nodded, her eyes returning to the stack of newspapers. A thought crossed her mind. Loren, when was the first reported incident? He picked up the newspaper again and scanned it. Looks like a couple of weeks ago. A couple of weeks ago, Rowan repeated, absorbing the gravity of it all. Around the same time you changed me. The room fell silent, the weight of the discovery settling between them like an unspoken pact. They were no longer just survivors adapting to a darker world. They were hunters tracking an enigmatic predator, one that was inextricably tied to their own shadowy origins. The questions kept piling up like an untamed fire. But at least now they had something concrete to work with. It felt like a door had creaked open, just a sliver, offering a murky glimpse into the labyrinth they would soon have to navigate. She couldn't turn back, even if they wanted to. The stakes were too high, and time was running out. We're getting closer, Rowan, Loren said, looking at her with a resolute gaze. Closer to understanding the darkness that binds us, and perhaps closer to finding the one who cast it. Rowan met his eyes, feeling a surge of newfound resolve. Then let's make sure we're ready when the time comes to face it. As they sat back down, their attention returning to the ancient text spread out before them, they both sensed it, that they were teetering on the precipice of revelations, both liberating and terrible. There was no turning back now. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but it was one they would have to walk. As the first light of dawn began to pierce the horizon, Rowan glanced at Loren. Their eyes met, a silent acknowledgement of the encroaching daylight. Let's get some rest, Loren said quietly, his voice tinged with a gravity that neither of them could ignore. They retreated to the bedroom, carefully drawing the heavy curtains to block out any trace of sunlight. In the dimness, their reflections flickered in each other's eyes for a moment before they climbed into the bed. Within minutes, the exhaustion of the night's revelations washed over them, and they surrendered to sleep's inviting embrace. Loren's dreams, however, were far from peaceful. He found himself walking through a forest drenched in the milky glow of the moon. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. As he moved deeper into the forest, he began to hear a voice. A woman's voice, whispering his name like a long-lost lullaby. He followed the voice, his mind a mix of dread and excitement. And then, as if stepping through a veil, he found her. She was dancing in a small clearing, her body twisting and turning in the rain that began to fall. Her hair, both blonde and black, clung to her face, her skin illuminated by the ethereal light. But it was her eyes, glowing with a dark crimson hue, that held him captive. "Find me, Loren," she whispered, her voice intertwining with the wind and rain, "but come alone." He woke with a start, disoriented and gasping for breath. The room was still dark, the curtains holding their vigil against the daylight outside. He turned to see Rowan beside him, her body curled in peaceful slumber. For a moment he was tempted to wake her, to share the vividness of his dream, the haunting allure of the woman's voice. But something held him back. Her words echoed in his mind. Come alone. What did it mean? Was it a premonition? A clue? Or a trap? His gaze shifted back to Rowan, her face serene in the muted darkness. Could he risk involving her in something so perilously unknown? He pondered the weight of the decisions that lay before him, each path leading to a different set of uncertainties, each choice packed with implications neither of them could yet understand. As he lay there, caught in the limbo between dream and reality, he realized that whatever the next steps were, they were steps he and Rowan would have to carefully consider, either together or apart. The shadows of truth and deception had been cast, and as night would inevitably turn into day and day into night, they would have to confront what lay hidden in the darkness.